And with that, I'd like to welcome Astrid Wendlandt. Astrid is the founder, editor-in-chief of Miss Tweed. Astrid, welcome. And Astrid's logged in from Paris. If you could give us an idea of Miss Tweed and your most recent career. By the way, Astrid has met Putin too. So, anyways, go ahead, Astrid. Astrid, you have to turn the mic on. It's the yeah.
Technology is great when it works, isn't it? Thank you so much for having me. Well, I'll be super brief. I'm a Franco-Canadian journalist based in Paris. I've been covering the luxury industry for about now 18 years. I was the European luxury correspondent at Reuters for more than a decade. And I left to publish a book called How Luxury Conquered the World, which talks about how Hermès, Cartier, Louis Vuitton became these incredible powerhouses and how the luxury industry became one of the major pillars of the global economy. And in France, we call it the Silicon Valley of France. After that, in June 2020, I launched Miss Tweed, which is now really becoming the go-to place for independent, exclusive news and analysis on the fashion and luxury industry. And we publish, scoops. We were the first ones to report, 2 weeks ago that Delphine Arnault was going to become the CEO of Dior, and Pietro Beccari of Dior was becoming the CEO of Louis Vuitton, which these two brands, by the way, are, more than 70% of the EBIT of LVMH, the parent, which you've discussed earlier. And we published numerous scoops and all the time. And that one was also credited by the New York Times. So that was nice to have such, well, the New York Times, which is effectively the world's biggest media, crediting little Miss Tweed. Here we are in Paris with a scoop on the world's biggest luxury brands management. Now, to talk about 2023, which is what we're here to discuss. Omar made a couple of points, and yes, last week, Bernard Arnault, the CEO and controlling shareholder of LVMH, became the world's richest man. Well, that's also because Elon Musk has had seen his fortune melt because of his, debacle with Twitter. But it's also because the Chinese are coming back. And it's the reopening of China that has really made investors much more bullish on luxury, and that's why LVMH shares and the shares of the whole industry have been climbing steadily since China, out of the blue in December, announced an end to its zero COVID policy, and on January 8th, the country reopened its borders. And that has taken many people by surprise, including the airline and aerospace industry. Now, Omar, you were discussing about the return of the Chinese, and you were saying maybe the summer. Yes, I think that's a pretty good forecast. I've last week, Miss Tweed, last Sunday, we published a story on that very theme of the Chinese returning. Now, let's remember the Chinese are the #1 luxury buyers. Why? Because they like to show they've made it, to show their wealth, perhaps more than any other culture, but it's really for them very socially important to wear the most prestigious up-and-coming fashion and luxury brands. And the luxury customer in China, who has been locked up for 3 years, is finally going to be able to travel. So Miss Tweed published a story saying, time to track that Chinese luxury shopper again, because that's what brands were doing before COVID. And now they're going to start resuming that little game of, guessing where they're going to go, making sure they have boutiques, making sure they have staff, they're looking after the desires and the needs of the Chinese customer. So LVMH last week saw a record, and also has to be said, its market capitalization reached more than 400 billion euros, which made it the most valuable European company in history ever.
What do you do?
Just to say. Sorry, did I have a question? No?
No, you didn't have a question. I don't know how we got that audio bite, but go ahead.
That's okay. So yeah, I just want to elaborate on the Chinese. because, as we've written in Miss Tweed, the airline and aerospace industry didn't expect that, so they're not ready for the reopening of flights and doubling down on capacity, because many aircraft have been grounded. And right now, the aerospace industry is facing lots of bottlenecks. So even if there is demand, and even if airlines want to, help these Chinese travel again, it's not going to happen overnight. And many experts say they might have to wait until the end of the year for those flights to resume. Now, those flights are crucial. Why? For luxury, because we want to know when they'll be able to come, for example, to France or to Europe, to Italy, to the US and other parts of the world. And most experts agree that Chinese are going to travel, first of all, in China, then Korea, then Japan, where the yen is quite weak, where they will be spending money, in Korea and Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and then maybe they'll come to Europe. But that is more the spring and probably the summer at the earliest. So I was talking to boutique managers who were saying, yes, we know they're coming back, but it just hasn't happened yet. So we do have a few months to recruit more Mandarin speakers, for example. And I didn't get a sense of panic, but more of rejoice. So that's good news. The other thing is that revenues will continue to increase simply because not only demand will remain quite strong, partly also because of the inflation that Omar was talking about, the value that consumers see in a luxury item, in a way kind of a hedge against inflation. The other thing we're going to see is more price increases. So revenues are going to go up because the price of best-selling luxury goods are going to continue to rise, both in the United States and Europe this year. So that's another growth of revenue for many luxury stocks this year. Another point I want to make is, and we've mentioned it, is more and more brands realize that their core customer is between 15 and 25 years old. And that is a complete, it requires a mindset change, because you don't talk to these people in the same way as you talk to 30, 40, or 50 years old. And I think brands this year are really going to double down on understanding that generation, how to, have a dialogue, how to get them to interact with the brand. I think that's definitely going to be high up on the priority list for brands. Now, another thing I would like to mention is M&A, something Omar can't talk about, but I can. So there are a couple of things that are going to happen. I think we're going to continue to generally to see more and more vertical integration. Miss Tweed did a story on how Italian suppliers, goaded by private equity firms, who basically what's happening in the Italian luxury manufacturing scene, which is really the backbone of that whole industry, because 80% of luxury goods, as you know, today are made in Italy. Brands want to buy their suppliers to secure their, their supply and the quality, and also they're concerned about, the environment, the social workers' welfare, and etc. And but they cannot turn around a supplier. So private equity firms have identified suppliers who need help, so they invest in them, turn them around, and they know that in 2-3 years they can then sell them to an LVMH, to a Prada, to a Zegna, to a big brand. And I think we're going to continue to see more of those kinds of deals where you have a private equity firm Exodus selling to an LVMH, or you're going to see more private equity firms coming in and see there's another trend is they buy several suppliers and they create synergies between them, and then they just offload the whole group to a big brand. So that's an interesting phenomenon. A few brands are going to hit the market. One can only think about Tod's, that's going to be taken private, and the Tod's group has not only the Tod's brand, but Faye, Hogan, what was the other one? Oh yeah, Roger Vivier, the shoemaker. Those brands might also come to market this year, so we'll see what happens. I think Prada is another brand and stock to watch. Miss Tweed was the first to report that they had hired former Dior executive. I can say it now. It's Gianfranco Dattis, who's the former Dior executive in the US, and he's become the CEO of Prada, the brand. Prada didn't have a CEO before. And Prada just also hired Andrea Guerra, who was a member of the executive committee of LVMH, to become its new CEO. And therefore Patrizio Bertelli becomes chairman. And Prada is an example of how to manage succession, which is also key for investor sentiment, for strategy, for reassuring staff, for corporate culture, for all these reasons. Succession planning is key, and I think Prada has really emerged as the best in class, and is also putting pressure on groups like Richemont and Johann Rupert, who's now 73 and has not said a word about who's going to succeed and what the plan is. But to come back to Prada, I think Prada is definitely on a revival path. It's hired a lot of talent. I think its design is now secure with Raf Simons, who's been welcomed by the fashion critics as the successor of Miuccia Prada, and I think they will continue to go from strength to strength, and that's already in the market. I think Omar will tell you it's probably trading 30 PEs or something, but Prada is definitely an interesting recovery story that I think investors will follow very closely. And the other big development that we're expecting this year is Kering, the owner of Gucci. As you know, they've lost their designer, Alessandro Michele, who abruptly left the brand, which is Kering's biggest, cash machine, at the end of last November. And investors discovered with horror that Kering had actually not plan the succession of the designer of its biggest brand. So they were a bit worried. And then you had the whole Balenciaga, the BDSM teddy bears. I don't know if you heard about this controversy, but it was a media nightmare for Balenciaga, so much so that Kim Kardashian and all the celebrities who were wearing the brand, stopped working with it. And actually, I was talking to some American consumers in a Balenciaga shop who say they were now stopping wearing Balenciaga in public because of the controversy. So that we'll see how Kering recovers from that. And I think to move the conversation and the narrative away from, we don't have a replacement for Michele at Gucci, and we don't know how we're going to recover at Balenciaga, Kering is going to unveil some plans about how it wants to build from scratch a beauty unit. And it's hired Rafaela Cardeggio, who is a former Estée Lauder executive, and she will be a member of the Kering Executive Committee. That's another scoop that Miss Tweed wrote a couple of weeks ago. And that will be very interesting to see how Kering, which is effectively a fashion group, as specialists will remember, it tried to dabble in watchmaking, but it didn't end well, and it had to sell its brands, Ulysse Nardin and Gérard Perregaux. It still has jewelry with Pomellato, and Boucheron is a fraction of what rivals like Van Cleef and Arpels are. So Kering is really, its strength is fashion, and I think it will be very interesting to see what it's going to do in beauty, particularly as the license for Gucci is still in the hands of Coty, which is a US company, US listed company. And that license is is officially going to stay with, Coty for another 4 or 5 years, and whether Kering buys it back. Because it's one thing to go to beauty, but you can't just say, all right, we're going to start, producing beauty products. You need to have a critical mass. And it's not with small brands like Bottega Veneta and Alexander McQueen that Kering is going to be able to build that critical mass. It's with Gucci. And as you know, Kering was in the competition to buy Estée Lauder, was in competition with Estée Lauder to buy Tom Ford. And Tom Ford is effectively an eyewear and a beauty business. And Kering was hoping to take that beauty business, to help it gain scale. But in the end, it lost it to Estée Lauder. So anyway, there's lots more, but I just want to let you ask some questions if you have any.
Great.